Good afternoon, everyone. My name is TJ Fitzgerald. I'm a second-year student here at Yale Divinity School. And with me today is my partner, Raffael.
Yeah, my name is Raffael Fasel. I'm an LLM student at Yale Law School.
And we're coming to you today from the Interdisciplinary Center this afternoon, and we're very pleased to introduce Paul Waldau, who is an educator, a scholar, and an activist working at the intersection of animal studies, ethics, law, religion, and cultural studies. He is currently the lead faculty member for the Anthrozoology graduate program at Canisius College, which is located in Buffalo, New York. He has been the Baker Visiting Professor of Animal Law at Harvard Law School since 2002, and he has led the Animal Law Reading Group at Yale Law School and has served as director of the Center of Animal and Public Policy at Tufts University School of Veterinary Medicine. He's played active roles in the AAR and in other organizations in bringing about the disciplines of animal studies, and is the author of a number of books, which we'll discuss soon. But I want to get right into the conversation, if that's all right. Welcome, Paul. We're glad you're here.
Thanks.
One of the things that the group did in this class here, when we were first getting used to your writing and some of your work, was to discuss the affection we had for animals in our own lives and some of the experiences of sort of first awareness of maybe a consciousness or this other non-human animal that we're dealing with. And in preparation, I read some stories about you swimming with dolphins, and I wondered if you wouldn't mind starting a little bit with what that first experience was like and what other sort of experiences that might have led to early on.
I'm glad to do that. It's an exercise I use in the class, and it's often in the Anthrozoology graduate program, the very first exercise, so that people have a chance to connect up with the personal dimension. For me, lots of these experiences, but the paradigmatic one was in Huntington Beach, California, when I had been learning about the coastal dolphins, not studied well by scientists, but clearly known well by the surfers. Mm-hmm. And so my brothers and I lived nearby, and we would be up on the cliffs seeing them, and so we learned to approach them. And so eventually I learned to go out and swim with them, seeing them come down the coast. And the really lovely epiphany, I think you can call it, happens when I'm out in the water by myself. Now, it's really a fascinating thing for a human to go out into the deep water. The swells make it very difficult to see anything, but I can't find the dolphins. I've seen them coming, and so I'm a little frustrated. And all of a sudden I hear a very loud chafa, which is a dolphin surfacing and right next to me. And a dolphin, they have eyes on the sides of their head, so one eye comes up about this far from me and just trains right on my eye. And I'm speechless, a rare event. And if intuitively, there's a passage in Thomas Berry's prologue to A Communion Subject where he quotes someone about being transported when we see a fox. This was more than being transported. This was being elevated, connected. And we sometimes will say phrases like, I know there's a light on, but I can tell you from the interaction there was such a remarkable being on the other side. And I humbly would say, I'm not really sure I know much about that being. And it lasts all of about a second and a half, but it's about an eternity in memory. And the young dolphin realizing, here's an interesting creature I don't usually see, interacts in that wonderful, intense way for a second and a half, maybe 2 or 3 seconds, and then darts away. Mm-hmm. And I'm back to the, wow, I'm out in the middle of the ocean, I can't see anything. But I was just so elevated by it. And I remember that as if it's happening now. It was that intense a connection. And others that I've known will talk about paradigmatic dogs, cats, horses, those kinds of experiences. So I'm gratified to have that one. And I bet people in an animal studies class could create a whole menagerie of these kinds of experiences.
Yeah.
Would you say that it's experiences like these that really keep you going and keep you motivated despite like just the horrendous events that are constantly happening all over the world, millions of animals being killed every second, literally? Would you say that connecting to these sort of experiences that we maybe had in our youth or even later sort of help you like keep the momentum?
You can see, and when I hear that question, I've never been asked that question before. Yes, I think it is important. I think if it wasn't there, I would do the same work. But the fact that it happens allows me, when I start an animal studies class, to use that exercise to get people to say, here's why I'm here. Because one of the keys in animal studies courses is that the students who arrive with deep commitments, great questions, often anger. And the question is to create a culture where that can be expressed, but it has to turn into a positive, constructive sort of thing where the sharing deepens our understanding and you learn to listen to others' pain as well, not just express your own. So it's a true asset that people have these, and no doubt in my life, Raffael, it's an asset as well that keeps me. I would do this in any event, but it certainly is something to celebrate as I do this.
I wonder, in your speaking about the experience that way, and I'm also here looking at the cover of Animal Studies, and we had spoken briefly, and right next to a communion of subjects, and so the idea of subjectivity is kind of coming up, and I wonder in this, would you describe in this second and a half that seems to have this trajectory that has lived, if there's something about the kind of eternal subjectivity that we have a relationship to other animals through? And I don't know, one of the comments you made was that who's studying whom on this cover, and I wonder if you could say something about what you think either this killer whale or what kind of whale is that, I'm sorry?
It's a right whale.
What a right whale would be, just so we can show people, might be thinking about us, or what the dolphin you think might have been thinking about you.
When I first started doing lectures on animal studies, I put this on the slide, PowerPoint slide, and so it's very clear, and it's a beautiful photo of the year for National Geographic. And I approached the author, who was excited to have this on the book. So the question I was asked, so I have a question. For my students, for example, the undergraduates say, how many mammals do you see in this picture? So they're going to be forced to say 2 here. But eventually one of the questions is going to be, who's studying whom here? And there are very big brains. It turns out the bigger brain is in the right whale. I don't think there's any question. I've never been underwater with the right whale. I have with other whales. And it's very clear that they're curious, like this bottlenose dolphin off the coast of Huntington Beach, California. And in terms of subjectivity, there's a whole field of philosophy which makes a point of saying it's very hard to know the mind of other humans and be able to say with certainty that there's consciousness there. There's a wonderfully rich field. It tells you how complicated we are. This is ever more complicated with other living creatures as well. But the ability to come home, it's, I think, something we recognize. Martin Buber traced it out as I and Thou, and his passages about animals in not only I and Thou, but in Between Man and Man, are unbelievably lyrical, and how he realizes he's connecting up with his sort of paradigmatic connection to a horse, for example, in Between Man and Man. So these experiences, I think, are important, but this question, JJ, is a wonderful one because it opens up the universe to us marvelously to say who else is with us in this journey.
Mm-hmm. You're currently working on a new book that discusses the question as to how animals invite us to think about them. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit on that idea?
This is a manuscript I've lived with for 3 years, but I came into the academic world, and there's an academic style in some of these books, which some people maybe celebrate. I'm sure some lament. The academic style is, in a way, was developed at Oxford on specter of speciesism in order to force the PhD, because I was acutely aware of the fact that this was not a canonical subject. And it worked out fine. It was a 45-minute exam, and it was soaring, and it was absolutely a beautiful experience. The Animal Invitation has been written in this manner, but I recognized I don't want to do that. I want to write something more lyrical. I think Mary Evelyn and John, for example, there are beautiful passages in Thomas's prologue to A Communion of Subjects, and it's that sort of writing, I think, that is often needed. After a number of academic books, it's also a pleasure to be able to write more freely along the lines of people like Annie Dillard or Martin Buber. There's so many wonderful writers, and the ability to communicate what it is that each of us as a very complex animal experiences when we encounter others, human or otherwise, is a really rich tradition that I'd like to explore more. So in a way, I will finish it this summer. That's the commitment, and it is a question of softening the language, actually perhaps expanding it and enriching it in some ways. So the point here is to recognize that in countless ways, when a human encounters another, there is a kind of possible experience with humans, of course, we all know that deeply, but with many other living beings. In this society, with companion animals, horses, dogs, cats, but I gave you the earlier example of with the free-swimming dolphin, who certainly was my equal and more. And so to try to find language that honors that and also brings us all home to the fact that if you're open to this, you will find it everywhere. Neighborhood, backyard, out in the ocean, you can find it truly everywhere. So I wanted to use some sort of creative phrase, and the animal invitation attempts to capture that.
Yeah. I wonder if we could walk back just a little bit, and I know that you were a trial attorney, schooled in the dark arts of civil litigation, and I can't help but wonder, I know now your position is in academia, but was there ever a time you thought maybe that the courtroom was the place to do work on behalf of non-human animals?
The answer to that is no, although I was with a very sophisticated litigation firm, and there were such wonderful skills in the people ahead of me that you couldn't help but by osmosis become quite competent. And I rose to be the administrative partner, but and I did lots of trials, but I had relentlessly human clients. It was only later that I said, I would have loved to have been a lawyer and having that dolphin as a client. That would have brought out some zealous advocacy. But I realized fairly quickly that the clash that is the essence of litigation, zealous advocacy on each side, hopefully resulting in the truth, was not my style. I was much more interested in the irenic approach that you find in the academic world, where you get people to walk together. And it was something that showed up in my style as a lawyer. And although things went well, I became a partner very early, and they very generously compensated me when I was the first partner ever to leave this marvelous law firm. They were surprised, but I wanted to go do this, because this is like stepping off a cliff and falling down for me. The chance to take people of goodwill to work on our relationship to the entire universe, to not only the non-human animals and the humans, but of course to the ecosystems in our rich place. I find it a richly spiritual experience. And this isn't a person who goes around using the word spiritual too often, but it is clearly that, and it is so engrossing for me that I never think of myself as doing anything but starting again. So I don't want to start again in a courtroom. One of my first students at BC did a paper on chimpanzees testifying in court. My first response was, what is a chimpanzee doing in court? This is not a good situation. And of course you could tape it. But she wanted to work out the technical details of that. But for me, the encounters I want with, and on behalf of, other living beings is out in the world, on a walk, on a swim, that sort of thing. So no, I don't want to go back into the courtroom, even if I can defend that dolphin.
Paul, as a professor, you have one foot in the academic world, but as we've heard, you are a former attorney, you're the president of the Religion and Animals Institute, and you were also the legal director of the Grade A project. So you also definitely have a foot in the sort of world of practice. How important do you think is it personally for you to be involved in both worlds?
I think it's a matter of being informed to keep a foot in each of those worlds. My trait seems to be to move into a field like law and try to expand what's offered there, and then to bridge it over to other fields like religion. When we think of our work on religion and ecology, religion and animals, it has been so gratifying to see how natively people take to it. And for me, another step here is to bring fields into dialogue. And I'm aware that in these first wave forms of animal studies and anthrozoology and religion and animals, that they're often isolated into the tradition of discourse that they've inherited now. In religion and animals, for example, almost nobody talks to the law and animals people. And yet there is great expertise over there, and vice versa. And if we can combine those two fields and get benefits, we can combine 4 fields and get better benefits. We can combine the entire academy. So the closing chapter in animal studies is this attempt to say, so what would the university look like if we didn't just do the dualism thing of sciences on the one hand and arts and the humanities on the other? What would happen if we had a third branch that helped us get out into the rest of the world? And to me, that's not a very easy thought to think about, but it is a wonderful thought idea to try to have, thought experiment as it were. And so I realize that the attempt here is a very preliminary attempt, and I want to continue to explore that, how we get experts from these different domains to cross-fertilize, to really work together, because my sense is we see much further, much further by doing that.
Yeah. I think in that vein, some of your writing is about, I don't know if finding a new language is the right way to put it, but maybe same language in new conversations. Yeah. I don't know if that's an apt way to put it, but I think you do have some interest in using language in new ways in order to do this.
Well, let me give you a little background for that. First of all, I think the whole approach is to create a gentle culture where people feel that they can venture and even be wrong but safe on ideas about the future, on ideas about how to protect, on their deep concerns. I work in a science department where scientists teach students to use phrases like humans and animals. Now, that phrase is a complicated phrase from the scientific vantage point. Humans are primates, mammals, vertebrates. These are all animal categories. We're just as much animal as any other animal. And scientists should be on board for that instantly. So when I arrived at Canisius, I said to the chair of the department, let's finish the scientific revolution. Let's go all the way. But they struggle. That's typical of primates, though. They're invested in their traditional language. And it's like, well, welcome to the world. And so some of the language games that I play, if I can use that phrase, is just trying to stretch us, stretch myself. I've embarrassed myself for 2 decades now, standing up in public and saying non-human animals, the more than human world, these sorts of phrases. And I'm always targeted, clearly identified as an activist. But for me, the basic piece of wisdom is, listen, everybody's an activist on this point. If you're using the phrase humans and animals, you're an activist, but you're so joined by so many others that nobody notices this agenda. But that is agenda-ridden. I can at least defend myself by saying, you scientists, I'm using your agenda. I want to use scientific language. How about it? And now I've sort of forked them into the position of, oh my God, I either have to agree with him or I have to disagree and be unscientific. And that's a lovely place to put people who aspire to critical thinking. And it's where I'm put sometimes. And it's a question of language can be such a, well, it's a house of being, a house of new being, if I can misquote Heidegger.
In your writings, you seem to really show a great deal of optimism as to the role that academia can play. And we were sort of wondering in our class here as to why you are so positive about the role that academia can have.
We had this lunch discussion today where we were disclosing a little bit of this. I had the good fortune to be raised by 2 very nice parents in a big Catholic family that was poor, so we developed some skills of caring about each other that was very effective. And it was particularly my mother's graciousness and kindness that rubbed off on all 8 children. This is a fascinating fact in the face of the fact that our father was such a powerful individual. You would have thought we'd all turn out like him. No. We all turned out like the really powerful parent, our gracious, loving mother. So it works. And we were discussing at the lunchtime session today that what really works is you need multiple discourses to talk to a wide range of people. And when you go into a community that is invested in one discourse, you best show them that you respect their discourse, work with them, so that if you're working with Buddhists, talk to them in terms that Buddhists understand. My mentor was the philosopher of religion, John Hick. And if you ask John what his work was about, he'd say, I want to describe a religious tradition in a way that the adherents say, yep, that's us. And in a way, what I'm after is when I'm talking to people, getting them to realize they get to use their discourse. I'll try to bridge back. I'll try to let us all be ourselves in this conversation to see if we can't come to that really foundational feature that the animal invitation speaks to, and that is, if you are open to this, it's a marvelous world. It's a completely marvelous world. So in some ways, I'm just using language to sort of create bridges back and forth so that over time we can begin to talk in a trusting way, and then we go exploring.
Yeah, I wonder about that. What you said before about maybe, I don't know if it's fair to say, even your own voice you want to start to change in the way that you put your information out into the world from academic books and now looking forward prospectively into writing in a different voice. Does that have anything to do with the kind of either your own spiritual journey or your own spiritual progress, or is this still like the ongoing conversation or invitation maybe that you're feeling from the non-human animal world to...
We've had a couple talks today about how interdisciplinary work is so difficult because you're always at a disadvantage, so that when I'm in a law conference, I'm with people who do only law and I'm doing it 1/6 of the time. And I teased at lunch saying, I sometimes will say, I'm incompetent in 6 different fields. Because I really am with experts. I want the language to help us. I know that the academic language can sometimes... I'm teaching an animal ethics course right now, and one of the exercises for my students is, what does this academic language about ethics have to do with your real life? That's the very first exercise. And these are people who come for ethical reasons, but they often balk at employing deontological language or utilitarian concepts or virtue ethics. So we try to get beyond to people like Martha Nussbaum and her capabilities approach, because it's so focused on the actual individual's features. Or there are wonderful ethicists around. And so for me, teaching is about using the skills that people bring and those that I have to somehow meet and begin to work together. I'm acutely aware that in the 12th conversation we're doing so much better than we're doing in the first. Mm-hmm. But I can't get to the 12th unless I go through the first, the second, and so I always want that to be an invitational, soft, let others be wrong, but venture forth why this is important and share that. That safety creates great educational dynamics, but it just takes half a term, half a semester to let it happen, and when it's going, you start to realize that here we go, and it's a gratifying thing when it happens.
Maybe if we go back to your last book, Animal Studies, and maybe also discuss more specifically animal law, I'd be interested in hearing how you see the two concepts, animal rights and animal studies, interrelate.
I just did a paper, the opening paper for the journal that the graduate program will publish, student-led. But I asked them for permission, and I wanted them to approve this, and I'm in good standing with them, so they did approve this, that I could have the opening article and the invitational article. And it's called Animal Studies in the Key of Animal Rights. Animal rights is a dirty swear word in many science departments. You say that word, people will turn and walk away from you. This is true of some churches as well. But I wanted, because I have good standing and it's known that I'm a sort of a walk with me person, I wanted to use that phrase. I don't use that phrase very often in public, although it is the title of this book, Animal Rights, because Oxford University Press wanted this title. Sure, I like the term. It's just that it isn't very productive in mixed company, if you understand my meaning. I think that this is the real revolution, animal studies, using our capacious ethical abilities, scientific abilities, abilities to think critically, cross-culturally, interdisciplinarily, to try to understand our relationship with all the other living beings. For heaven's sakes, they're ubiquitous, they're all around, they're everywhere, but we've ignored them in our academic world. I think animal rights is an attempt to do a revolution, and it's a nice sort of minor revolution. I don't mean to demean it by that. What I mean by that is we're using powerful conceptuality that we have deployed to protect human beings from horrific human-on-human harms. This is the really great use of the term of the legal rights system. It has worked well, and we want to deploy it across the line. It's very creative, but it will only apply to some of the non-humans. If we can be informed about these non-humans in not necessarily saying, oh, they're like us, cognitive superstars. Great, great, wonderful status to be in. It leads to arrogance, as all of us know. The issue is that there are many other living beings that matter immensely, but won't qualify as cognitive superstars. Animal studies can recognize that far sooner than animal rights can, because we're deploying this superstar technique that we want. And if we had a world where all we did was use our legal rights to protect humans, and we used many other forms of our ability to be caring living beings to protect non-human animals such that it was effective and fundamental, I'd say I don't have any problem with that at all. I'd love to have legal rights for other living beings, but if it doesn't work, that's not the end of the game. There are many, many other mechanisms that we have.
Yeah.
Could you maybe elaborate on these other tools that we have in the legal toolbox to help sort of further animals' interests?
Legislation, it's quite possible. For example, some countries have prohibitions on ownership. It doesn't involve the protected animals and having rights, but you see we can use our ability to self-regulate in these powerful ways to say, they're not going to tolerate people owning chimpanzees. This isn't how it's going to work. We're going to want them in their own communities where we protect them. Elephants can certainly be protected with this sort of thing as well without having to carry individual rights. It's a very complex thing in our legal system to have an individual non-human carrying this powerful shield. It can work. We can make it work. We're clever this way. But it really strikes me that the legal system is truly an incredibly diverse toolbox that you reach in and you pull out problem-appropriate tools to solve with the dilemma in front of you. But going beyond that legal toolbox, there are so many things in our religious communities. We can learn to talk and see things. We can teach our children. One of my favorite quotes is David Orr's lovely comment about education, unless it's of a certain kind, can merely equip humans to be more effective vandals of the earth. Well, that's a good description of sort of modern education. Except now we bring along animal studies, and you can see why animal studies is the revolution. It's like, let's stop that. Let's stop that. We're harming ourselves. We're harming the other living beings. Let's be more Aldo Leopold. Responsible member of the land community, not conqueror, responsible citizen, plain citizen, responsible member. These are fundamental concepts that actually appeal to all of us if you recognize who's in your community. And obviously some non-human animals are in our community.
I'm going to ask you a question. I'm guessing you've been asked as the first or second question from most church groups or other groups you've spoken to after they hear all sorts of your ideas and what you want to say. You can probably guess that the question is, well, what can I do? What can I do right now in my community, in my place? And I'm not asking you that necessarily for me, but I'm almost asking your opinion on that question.
That's a very enabling question. I mean, that's a plea for help me see,
Yeah.
Just get away from the intellectuality here, please. Yes, this is the foundational question. It's the reason I wrote the book in a way, because I knew that there were people who wanted to come into the academic world and ask that sort of question, but it's hidden in there. It's the third of the three major questions. What is the answer? First of all, it's act locally. We each live in this world. If we take care of our local living beings, watch how really, really fecund this is in terms of possibilities. If we wanted to teach someone, let's say, the big high-order ecological notions of ecosystems, et cetera, and population dynamics and those sorts of things, and you said, well, let's go out and observe the local deer in the forest. This is typical in New England, where I live, for example. And if you got them to pay attention to the individual deer, you can learn to recognize them as individuals. And then you ask them, well, what sort of habitat do they need? Now you build from the idea of recognizing the individuals that you see as important to the fact that they have a habitat which if you destroy the individuals. Even though you might say, I would never harm that individual, but you will destroy their habitat. So you now built into the sort of natural individual to individual connection with the deer, the concept, the larger concept of ecosystems. For me, the one-on-one basis of our ethics leads wonderfully well, opens door after door to the larger concepts that environmental protection requires. It is elegant, the environmental work. It's just that it's often irrelevant to individuals in their daily life. It's like, let's go. Why would you pick up the trash here? Because this is the local deer's habitat. And now what lesson have you learned? You've really started to figure certain things out, that the interconnection that's so true of so many things, but somehow our ideas don't lead us to that. And if people start with environmental things, they often get it, but some don't. But animal protection has this extra personal connection that lets you add on, connect up, open the sort of transporting corridors to these beautiful, large concepts, which are quite important. It's just that they're not so existentially compelling at first for many people. And animal protection is.
In your writings, you also emphasize the sort of importance of education when it comes to maybe guiding our behavior. And you point out that over 150 law schools nowadays in the US offer at least one course on animal law. And so what we were discussing here in our course was as to why Yale Law School doesn't offer such a class, and even worse, why it declined an offer, a donation of $1 million that would have enabled it to offer such a course. What would you say could be the motivations that have led to such a decision?
I don't actually know. I'd love to ask the animals who made it and say, why not? But I will tell you that I think the people who made that decision do not recognize that the dynamism of the course is something that feeds the rest of education. It creates certain sorts of virtues that deploy easily in other fields. I'm not sure what the answer to that is. It baffles me. Especially because having done 2 reading groups here, it was an incredible experience for me. Partly because when you go to a school of the order of Yale or Harvard, the very high quality schools, there is a kind of level of exchange that is possible that is a richer and a different experience than I get, for example, in certain other places. I'm trying to say this as gently as possible. And that is very gratifying for somebody who aspires to try to think carefully, honestly, humbly, which is really a fun thing to do. And those of you who've written books will know writing books is just an unbelievably humbling exercise because it takes so long. And I will tease and say, all the talent is in the finishing. None of it's in the start, none of it's in 3/4 of the way through. It's all in the finishing because it's so hard to finish these sorts of things. And for me, just the chance to engage as honestly in my own, taking responsibility for my own learning, which is what I will constantly say to my undergraduates, but always to my graduates. I educate graduates on the premise that each of them is unique, and I want to find her place, his place. It's almost always her. 85% women in all the animal studies courses. This group is the only group I have ever been in an animal studies centered focus that is gender balanced. It's the only one in 20 plus years of this. Now, I was looking around thinking, that's really wonderful. So the point is, how do I find the graduate students, teach them as individuals, learn them, etc.? That takes a certain sort of softness and patience. And as you can see, talking is a wonderfully enjoyable experience for this primate. And yet listening is even more profitable.
I wonder about not that there's an end game or whatever, but I don't know. I wonder, what is it maybe in the work that you do you would see as being, say, in the next 10 years as a big success?
Nice question, TJ. Here, I think this is a kind of success. First of all, there are 3 schools here. This is not the kind of thing that happens usually. I'm usually talking to the law school. I'm usually talking to Div school. I've got 3 powerhouse schools here, and I'm thinking, this is that. And John and Mary Evelyn know well that I was enabled by the religion and ecology people to do this work. It has launched this forward in a way that I could have never done on my own. The fact that this so beautifully administered and this community has grown in such a healthy, organic way, and the fact that the animal studies work can be integrated as part of that has given it respectability and access to these sorts of things. It is a natural. It took you, Mary Evelyn, it took you a millisecond when I asked you about the animals conference to say, yes, good, let's do it. I thought, wow, that's refreshing. So for me, the end game here is a short-term end game in the sense of getting the academic world to deploy its great skills when we're responsible, and not to create more effective vandals of the earth with our tremendously great, capacious technological skills. but instead to create something that is technologically proficient and protects us and gives us all the more skills, but to deploy those skills in the communion of subjects way. This is really what I'm after, and you can notice that I have a communal style. I'm aware, I'm a member of nested communities. Some of them are non-humans. I wonder, why do I always think of myself as a human, not as a mammal? I actually am a member of the mammal community, but I wasn't trained to do that, so I'm trying to learn. I'm not so good at this. But the point is that education can teach us that we will shape, socially construct our self-understanding, but we are in charge of this, and we can do this in an inclusive, fair way, not an autistic, leave the world way that pretends that somehow this was designed for us. If so, this is not the best design for us, if that really was the case. What's wonderful is that we do fit in wonderfully, and we have the ability to protect ourselves and nurture our larger community. We really have that ability. That Thomas Berry's phrase, the larger community, is the one that just probably most excites me, gets me furthest along, and I realize I am a member of a larger community. It is not just an idea, it is a reality. It happens every time I walk, which is why I walk every day, because I want to be back in my world. I really do.
I think you really nicely sort of highlighted the significance of making this step toward what you also called in your writing the second wave of animal law. But I would sort of also wonder, where do you see the challenges of this more interdisciplinary approach to animal studies?
Yeah, the second wave of animal law is, I think, an important phase. In essence, it is that it becomes more interdisciplinary. It reaches out across other domains. Science has an important place in modern law, but it's often been used as the handmaiden, that's not the right phrase, it's often been used as the tool of oppression. If you know some of the pre-Brown versus Board of Education discussions, the use of science was to assert racial inferiority. But science is relentlessly powerful, questioning everything, and it strikes me that we really have such great potential available to us if we work together in a very humble way. So I'm constantly trying to get law to talk to religion, because in the animals and religion group there's a dynamism that is beautiful to see. There is in the religion and ecology group. And it's a question of, now, how do we cross-link? I'm not at all expert in that. I am willing to try, and it is a slow process. It is a risky thing to do animal studies and think, I'm going to get a PhD and get 100 job offers. That is not what's happening. Lots of us who have these positions have really had to pierce through this and be disadvantaged. It's not. I don't look to a disadvantage, and obviously I haven't been in some senses ultimately. But I'm aware that my students are at risk, so I'm trying to create in them realism. One of the reasons I'm most interested in the academic world is I want to, here's a good use of cloning, clone our program. Get others to attempt to outcompete us, because what we do at Canisius is powerful and good, and if somebody's outcompeting us, wow, is that not to be applauded? So for me, if someone says, what if they get better than we are? It's like, great, then we'll have to catch up. And for me, this is the point of education, is to kind of get this multiplication going. And you can see this starting to happen, but it goes very, very slowly.
Yeah, it's hearing words in the realm of law and academia like humble, humility. It's not something I hear every day in those realms. And so I just wanted to, I guess maybe personally, what have been the advantages, either the sort of the source of finding this discovery, and where does this come from, that working in this way, looking for humility, looking for, being humble in the way that we go about this, does that come from any sort of personal spiritual findings, discoveries, or beliefs, or is that just what has worked? I mean, is it almost practical humility, or how is that shaped for you?
I think probably others can answer that better. I don't think there's any question that John, Mary Evelyn, the two of you, by working together, have modeled that so often for me. We've talked about this before. I also have this style somewhat natively, and so I model that for others, but they pick it up and they teach me more. There are really remarkable people involved in the animal studies movement, and I'm situated well enough to have very, very good friends. And the dynamism that comes from that, and calling up someone like Mark Beckhoff or Bernie Rowland, who are senior players and have done amazing things, but to talk with them and get their ideas. I think part of this is simply recognizing that if we create a community, I'll tell you a story that illustrates this point. If we create a community, we see so much further. And this is the story. I grew up in a house of 8 children, 5 boys. We weren't allowed to go on the roof, which meant we were up there quite regularly. And so we're standing on the roof. We're all quite interested in the stars. And one of the things that happened was all 5 of us standing. It's just the sun has just set. You're starting to see the stars come out, and people are saying, "See this? See that? See this?" It wasn't that we saw 5 times as far with 5 of us. We saw 1,000 times as far, because number one would say, "Do you see Mercury on the horizon?" Someone else would say, "Yes, that's right." And then someone else would say, "Build on that. How about this?" And the first person says, "No, I didn't see that. We build on that." We're building back. We're back and forth and back and forth. These are 5 loving brothers. And within 2 hours, we're seeing 1,000 times more than we would have seen if we were there alone. It wasn't 5 times as far. The communication helped us. That's a model for what happens in really, really well-functioning communities in the academic world. You reinforce, and everybody stands on shoulders, 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 and it really becomes dynamic in a way you cannot touch on your own. That's something intuitively we all know because we experience it. And it's the sort of thing, you cannot force it, you must let it happen. But as it happens, it's worth celebrating. That's another invitation in the world, where you see scholars working in that truly beautiful and fulfilling way. Nurturing, I think, is the way to describe it.
I would think that many people get invited, if I may say so, by their own domesticated animals, their own companion animals with whom they grew up. And you emphasize also that it's an important step in the second wave, that we sort of maybe try to keep our love, obviously, with our animal friends, but also maybe not try to let them distort our view of all the thousands and millions of other species that are out there. Can you maybe shed some more light on that thought?
Yeah, I've written about the companion animal paradigm driving modern animal law. Now, this is an open door, and that's to be welcome. And for heaven's sakes, the personal encounters and the invitations, literally invitations from dogs with their play bows, for example, or cats swiping you going by you saying, "Come here." These are to be built upon. The problem is evidenced by this story. I was part of the American Bar Association's animal law group, one of the founders, and so I'm asked to give a talk. So I'm going to come in and talk relentlessly like I'm talking now about academic situations. And they're yawning. I'm on the phone. I don't really know that, but I'm sure they were yawning. Because all they wanted to hear about was cat-intensive, dog-intensive proposals. They weren't interested in this broad, wow, education, dynamism stuff. And I thought, that's not good. These are powerful policy brokers for the future, but I'm trying to break them through to this. So there is a downside. Let's not overstate that. There's an upside that's totally worth keeping. So I am always cautious about trying to say, here's an advantage, but let's not let it be the show. The point is to take this, going back to the 5 brothers analogy, and let it be just one of the brothers that helps us get there, get there, get there, get there. And so companion animals needs to be a player. It is at the core of anthrozoology/animal studies. This is a political correctness. I don't like the term anthrozoology. I prefer animal studies. I still got the job leading the anthrozoology programs, thank heaven. But I think animal studies is the more generic way to describe this, because it allows us to be in. We are animals, and we're studying the others, and that wonderful balance that when we're well-behaved, if I might say it that way, when we're really having all of our integrities in place, studying other living beings is a powerful and good thing for us. That's all the evidence shows that. It is unbelievably integrating for us to recognize we live in a multi-species world.
I was reading some of the examples, like in India and in other places, where either inherently or through activism or through law, some of these changes are happening. And I guess if you could share with us what you have seen as current or recent successes of shifts of either small or wider communities with this regard, and how it might have gone about, or if there's anything we can take from those.
I often use this quote, and I'll use this to enter that question, TJ. Hard to start revolutions, harder still to sustain them, hardest of all to win them. And when you've won them, that's when the real difficulties begin. Okay, that's from Larbi Ben Hidi. That's in Gilles Pontecorvo's Battle of Algiers movie. Fabulous movie. In the history of film, quite an important film. But that helped me see that when we're trying to move a social movement along, we're to the sustaining it now. It's harder to sustain it. That's what we're doing right now. And there are some really important there are literally around the world thousands of pieces of protective legislation going into place. Literally. Proposed, hundreds going into place, you might say. And this is an important task. We've got in education all sorts of classes in geography, I was mentioning earlier today, literature. These are, and if you look at the history of art, the place of non-human animals in art is fabulously important and really very revealing of how ubiquitous they are in our lives. And so for me, the successes aren't always just in the animal law world, TJ, although they're there, but they come very slowly. They really come slowly. And it's a pendulum sort of things where things get undone. This happens. The passage of the Animal Welfare Act in 1966 was wonderfully important. It has been truly eviscerated in many respects. Nonetheless, there's still in place the IACUC, the Institutional Animal Care and Use Committee approach, which has some important protections. Not even close to enough. And we need to build on them and go much, much further, but they're there. I think in terms of laws, I think it's actually much more on the legislative side than on the litigation side. Litigation is a complex strategy, and those of us who have tried cases know you can lose cases on 1,000 bases. You can lose it on you can not even know why you lose it. Legislation is difficult, though, because the advocate of the litigation approach, Steve Wise, will say, I can't get into legislatures, they'll never listen to me, so I'm going to go into the courts because I'm a lawyer and they'll have to listen to me. Wow, okay, that says something. I still think legislation has all sorts of potential. It's probably off-continent for us mostly right now. The European Union is very far ahead, and you find lots of very interesting proposals happening in India and China, very complex societies in their own right, to be sure. But you can gather these different legislative achievements around the world and bring them home and say, let's try to work on this sort of thing. But we all know that the political dynamics in the U.S. are very caught up in a certain polarized debate over many topics, and it's very tough. So, if we can't win the votes, perhaps we can steal the minds of the children. Maybe that's the education approach. The point I'm making is that sometimes older primates get set, and you can't undo them. Even with patience, you can't. But you can in education, because there we're often working on Socratic methods or just the relevance of information. Or come back to the Science Channel motto, question everything. It's a very dynamic educational tool. Question everything. If it's good, it will stand up. And so it's a beautiful thing to try to implement that sort of critical thinking approach in education, because it only makes us stronger in every other field of education that we endeavor to achieve in.
Maybe another approach for animal advocates would be to join sort of efforts with maybe groups that have tried to advocate the interests of other oppressed groups. Do you think this is a sort of helpful or even feasible way that animal protection people could take?
Yes, it's certainly feasible. I'll give you an example. There was a woman who came to study at Tufts when I was the director of the program. She already had a PhD. She had for 20 years been the director of national campaigns for a major feminist group. She said, I spent 20 years of my life on the women's issue, and I'm now going to spend the next 20 years of my life on the non-human animal issue. And I thought, that's great. But there's a fundraising reality for nonprofits that you rarely like to share your donor base with others, even if they're doing exactly the work you're doing. There's a sort of, it's an infrastructure in search of self-perpetuation. We just need to raise money. We're not giving our names to others. Some nonprofits do, but it's a relentless problem with nonprofits not cooperating with each other. We see this in every social movement. It's just tragic in the extreme. But I think there's a sort of self-interest issue. Raffael, that makes cooperation with other social movements complicated. But you can see from the fact that this woman did such fantastic work on one social cause that she understood helping. She didn't give up her work when she came. She continued to work for the UN on women in Afghanistan. But she was becoming skilled in the other side as well. And so her name is Jennifer Jackman, and she holds out great hope for me. But I know that that's not statistically common in the groups that I see. But I will tell you that the graduate students I see would say, sure, I'll do that. It's quite evident that they're very, very interested in protecting humans, and now they're trying to work in another domain, but they don't give up their human protection commitments this way. So there is a way in which this is already happening, but there is this sort of institution-level incentive to not cooperate too well. Okay.
We're getting close to time, but if I could ask one final question. I'm curious what you've done so far that you'd be most happy to tell that dolphin that you accomplished?
What a lovely question. Well, let me take it back to the personal, because I think this is relentlessly a part of life. I deal regularly with activists. I get calls from people who want to be animal law lawyers. I get calls from people who want to do direct action. I'm very interested in meeting and talking to them. I'm a deeply committed peace activist, and nonviolence has to be the way. So I get a chance with direct action people to communicate this with them. So I'm quite interested in talking to activists. But the piece of advice that I give that I'm alluding to here is have a good personal life. I have the great fortune to be married to my best friend, and I know that that's a kind of solace in my life because there will be defeats along the way. So that one of the truly important things for me is to keep my personal life, walk, meditate, be in touch with good people, celebrate, and don't take my failures too seriously. After all, I'm just one person. So there is a way in which that has worked marvels in my life. I have a much calmer, especially if I meditate twice per day. That seems to help amazingly. Because you recognize, ego. So one of the things that matters most to me, TJ, I would say to the dolphin, listen, if we will just humble up and do the best we can, take ourselves seriously, but not too seriously, and have good interpersonal relationships, we can pay those forward. That's, to me, the fundamental strategy that I want. And I think that is what it takes to do activism on behalf of any group, is because activism in this frictiony world goes too slowly. This is the reality that in every cause I've been in, it's too slowly, but there are successes, and they are so worth celebrating. They are. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much for being here with us, Paul, and for sharing your thoughts and also personal experiences that you've had.
Well, thank you, Raffael.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.